for Cisco. We got Rob Bass, another local rep, and Jeremy's here from Phoenix to talk to you. And we got a Cisco engineer in the back trying to hide from the dribbling. And also Jeremy Pietzold from Clackamas ESD. He's here to kind of give us street credit. He uses the product, so if you have any not technical questions, but maybe overview questions, you can kind of take him maybe during the session. But we're not going to throw him under the bus too much, right, Jeremy? All right, thanks all.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you heard, my name is Jeremy Stanley. I'm a solutions architect. I work across all public sector, Fed, SLED, but a lot of my time is spent in education, working with administration down to the classroom, trying to drive thought leadership on how you guys struggle with security and how we can be more effective in dealing with that. And that's really what this story is about today. We're not here to talk about products. We're not here to pitch anything to you from a marketing standpoint. This is to have a conversation about the struggle that you have and maybe having a different perspective on how to deal with security. And a lot of my time is spent at NIST. I work in the coaching group on the leadership side there on some of the work groups that they have. I also work with the intelligence agencies, some of the three-letter side that you have, working on thought leadership and taking the work that they do there and figuring out how do we distill that in areas where they don't have the capability and the solutions, and aligning that in the process of what you do and how you struggle with this as technology proliferates the classroom. With that being said, I'm going to share an image here. This is tourists in Iceland that are visiting a volcano, right? And they're seeing lava flow. Now, when we think about risk, right? Some say, hey, there's risk here, but it's not so bad where we're going to be affected by it in a bad way, right? And people in Hawaii do this, around the world, go get themselves in situations where there could be something bad that happens, but it's not bad enough. And then we fall into this scenario where the citizens of Pompeii, who go way back in history, the volcano blew and they didn't have time to respond. Now, from a security perspective, which one are you? Are we here where we know there's risk and we feel like we're managing it and we have it under control? Or are we here? I mean, I think that depends based on your experience, what your capabilities are, what events that you've dealt with, right? That answer varies. And depending on the investment that you've been able to make in your environment in terms of capabilities, technologies, that answer varies as well. And that leads to this. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the K-12 Cybersecurity Resource Center. They've been tracking events in school districts for the past 2 years. There's roughly 329, 330 events that have occurred that they've tracked. And this is in the different colors. If you go to their website, you can click on each of these events and see which ones are ransomware, which ones are DDoS, which ones are phishing attacks. And there's different events. A lot of these, which are interesting, a lot of these districts are repeat offenders in terms of being affected and impacted by security incidents, which is an intriguing fact that we've heard. And some of them have spoken at some of the national events like COSIN.
So no red ones in Oregon, is that good?
It's not. But all the colors are bad in this scenario, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes. Right. There's no good, bad security event here, right? But take a look at this on your own time, of course, and do some research. What I think is very thoughtful about this, these folks are putting in energy to try and drive awareness. A lot of school districts are not sharing the pain that they're going through for numerous reasons, right? Fortunately for me, I work in a lot of the superintendent associations and business associations with school districts, and I hear direct feedback from the business leaders of school districts and the superintendents, and they'll verbally tell us, but they never want to tell the media, right? That's a brand issue. They don't want that to affect them, and sometimes it just leaks out, depending on what the scenario is.
Hey, Jeremy, I thought someone asked, where do you get the data?
This data, go to their webpage. They have a myriad of sources that they're bringing this from, but everything from the news, there's also cyber research centers that collect this data nationally that they're pulling it from. There's a lot of different sources here, but this is a great place for you when you're talking to your leadership. Hey, this is what's happening, or maybe it's your school district, right? Maybe you didn't have that awareness on it, but it's out there.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there a law or something that would force the superintendent to pay attention to this as part of their responsibility? Because I can't even get the meeting.
From a legislative standpoint, I'm not aware of a law.
Can we get one passed?
That's a whole nother. That's not my focus area there.
To the table.
That's out of your scope.
Well, it really is out of my scope, but it's a good point, right? As you know, getting your leadership to invest in solving this problem is difficult. Who here isn't having a difficult time getting the appropriate level of investment?
I'm going to make a comment.
Okay.
You don't have to do anything. When it happens to you, they'll pay attention.
Yeah, that's when they're going to learn it.
That's what I'm saying. You don't
That's
have to-
harder than just talking about it, or maybe you can present the data. The Seattle Housing Authority did a conference last week, and he had been attacked twice by ransomware. And I said, they're just like us.
Right.
And then it costs money in a lot of places to get out of it.
Right. Well, getting them to reactive is easy. Being proactive is the bigger component, right? Ones that have never been affected or impacted, or hey, it's not worth the risk, because it's really hard to get school districts to take money what appeared to be affecting the classroom and getting that invested in the technology. This is a struggle that I think all of you faced, and especially when they personally have not been impacted by this. This is a big issue. There's things that we're doing on the insurance side, working on the cyber insurance side to try to influence more of the states that are doing cyber risk to put in measures to say, hey, you make this level of investment and we will lower your risk on this side. But that's still in its infancy. And the only thing we can do as a group is communicate this out on the business side, because this is a business issue of a school district. It is a technology issue, and it's an administrator issue, because they should be looking at the people and process and figuring out how this aligns versus waiting until the incident occurs and then trying to figure out how to deal with it, right? And a lot of it goes to this. I still walk around schools today where this is still prevalent, right? Whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the CFO's office, wherever it be, this issue leads exactly to this. This is a simple thing. This is a cultural issue because schools are resistant to implementing security because the effect that it may have on the classroom. But the problem is that this leads to this. Any one of you disagree with that logic, right? And how do we make this shift? I mean, this is painful. The enterprise has figured this out. Most of them, at least, the mature ones, have figured out to move past this a long time ago. But they're still struggling, even with the investment in basic security like this. And then, right, personally and professionally, everything is getting connected, right? All of these things, from toilet, from bathrooms to, amazing to me, we have connected toilets now, and cars. Everything's becoming connected with this IoT craze. And what's interesting is that when a lot of these technologies are being connected, security is the last thing that's being considered, because it's usually developing security has cost and expense. And these things are just being brought into your environment. On the infrastructure side, HVAC systems, temperature controls, all of these things are being brought into your environment. There's a school district that I work with in my home state where a student hacked into their temperature control system, actually controlled their data center, turned the temperature all the way up, and burned their data center down, right? And for them, this was a big issue. This was a $3 million mistake for them. And that's just an example of many. I'm not here to scare you because you're already there. But the thing is that as this continues to occur, and we have technology having this efficiency in our lives, and as technology continues to mature in the classroom, this is going to happen more and more, right? And then we get into the incidents, right? The more you bring technology into the classroom, the more apps that are being affected into how the students are doing what they do. How many of you are having conversations? So curriculum, ed tech, how many of you are in here on the ed tech side? Not dealing with just IT. Okay, so that's interesting. So on the ed tech side, right, how many of them are thinking about security when they're bringing an app and trying it in the classroom? How many of them are? How many of the curriculum instructors that are bringing in the budget for this are thinking about security when they bring it in the classroom? As they are buying cloud services, how many of them are thinking about security as they bring it in the classroom, right? It's not top of mind, right? Unless they've been affected or impacted by it. But they're giving out all the students' data, a lot of the staff's data, depending on, is it an administrative tool, is it a classroom tool, and how does data loss be affected or impacted by this? And then why is this happening? We know there's financial impact to this, right? I think Oregon and Washington do you guys do Social Security numbers still with your students? This varies from state to state. Some states still do it, some states don't, so not here. Okay, so in my state, they still take the Social Security numbers, right? And those are ripe for the taking, right? Because you're typically unused, no history. Those are the perfect targets for them. But there's a financial component associated to each of these. These numbers vary depending on the year and the capability that goes on this, but there's money behind this. And is it nation state? Is it criminal? Is it political? It's all of it, right? What we're seeing is because of each of these categories on where it sits, is the level of investment and sophistication, especially on the country nation state side, where they are leveraging these attacks and the capabilities that are going on to these, is getting more complex every year, every moment in the capabilities that they bring. And a lot of times they go into the environment, schools are target-rich environments because you typically have a lot of bandwidth, a lot of computers, and little to no security, right? And then they use your resources to go and attack others or to grab what they can grab from you. It's not just one thing. They do everything that they can to maximize your capabilities as a resource. So this leads to this question. Are we secure? Can anyone say with absolute confidence, no matter how much you invest, that you're secure? Right? I think I've heard people say it, right? I mean, and I think as security and technology becomes more commonplace, the harder it is to answer this question. I think you can say that you have different levels of maturity into what level of security that you have, but saying that you are 100% completely secure is a fallacy. And anyone that tells you that they can make you completely secure, unless you disconnect everything that you have and use no technology, right, you're not going to be secure, right? Even on the government side and infrastructure side where we work, where there's completely air-gapped networks, as long as there's a human involved in touching these environments, there's a security issue, right? And this is a challenge for us, especially when we look into this situation, which is most of you, tireless defenders, relentless attackers, and their investment way out goes what your capabilities are, right? So how do we deal with it? You have administration that may or may not want to make the investment. You are on the technical side are trying to connect the business and the leadership and the business of doing this together to get them to take the advantage. And most of them are just wanting to focus on the governance piece. Let's do SIPA because we have to keep the kids from looking at things they shouldn't be. Or let's buy this because E-rate will pay for it. Is that really the right approach? I mean, those are steps that you should be taking, but is that there's more, right? And what I'm trying to say here is that you guys are a piece to the puzzle, and you're the ones that manage the technology and probably some of the people process on the governance side. But how do you bring everyone else into this? The classroom, the parents, the teachers, and start building a culture of how all this is being done in your environment. But don't worry. Every one of these people are going to solve your problem. Our name's on this list too, right? I mean, and this list is growing every day. Someone else has got a widget or a gadget or a gidget that's going to solve all your security problems, right? And we'll talk about Target, right? You guys heard about the Target incident. This cost them millions and millions of dollars, affected their brand, dropped their retail component, maybe even affected your decision to go buy stuff from them during the period of time of their attack. They had a lot of these products, right? And they had huge budgets, way beyond what most of you would ever have in your environment, and they still were affected. And it wasn't because of the technology, it was because of process, because of people, and they didn't implement the tools correctly. So even if you have every one of these things, if you don't have the people and process aligned, you're still going to have these challenges, right? And you have to be vigilant about it. It is not just about doing it today. You have to continue doing it every day and drive awareness on this. How many of you have dedicated security staff on your teams?
Well, this is Oregon, so. And Washington.
Right. Okay, so you're wearing a lot of hats, right? So I work in another group called CGCS, Council for Greater City Schools. They're usually districts that have 60,000 students or more, right? So they're big districts. They're all the way up to LA Unified, to New York Public Schools, the biggest ones that we have in the country, Chicago, Miami-Dade. And I think maybe 15% of them have dedicated security staff. So even them, right, they have much, much bigger budgets than you. And a lot of times they're more CISO-type roles where they're focused on governance and policy and trying to get leadership to be aware and integrate policy and how they make decisions. And that's a place where energy needs to be spent. But on the technology side, being able to deal with this and tie those two roles together is incredibly difficult. Would any of you disagree with this? How many security products do you have in your environment? Throw a number out there. I'm just curious. 3? Okay. So not that many. Now I'm talking about not just from the network perspective, the client, authentication, any type of inspection that you may or may not doing, authentication and authorization, and those are just the fundamentals. In some of the districts I work with, they don't have any of that, right? They may have SIPA compliance. It amazes me how many districts I walk into, and there's no authentication, none, right? The log on to the interface is student 1, right? Or the password is student. How many of you? Well, you don't have to raise your hands, but that's the challenge, right? And then you're getting this push, right? You step into this world of pain, right? You have an incident, and then everyone comes knocking on your door. Buy this, we'll solve the problem, right? Is that really going to solve the problem? And capturing people on pain moments is a big issue. And anyone on the manufacturing side like us, we're guilty of this because we want to help. But that conversation needs to be about not just the technology, but how does the people and process and your leadership and your teams blend those worlds together. There's a theme to this conversation I hope you're starting to see. So we talked about this. We talked about the flooded with products, lack of talent. How many of you can say with strong will that you're a cybersecurity expert? Right? That's a tough one, right? False confidence is a big issue, even on the enterprise side where they have major investment to solve this problem, and on the government side especially when we're talking about this multi-vector, multi-stage, people where they've come in your environment and they've thought about for months, years on how to leverage your environment to go attack others and yourself, right? Most of the environments we go into, they've been in your network, have owned you for years, and you never know until they flip that switch for whatever purpose it is that they have. So we have this issue. I don't know how many of you heard about the security effectiveness gap. Okay? This is where, as capabilities on the attacker side and the technology side continue to expand, the complexity goes up. Back to that threat, the sheet of all the different tools that are out there. Okay, buy this one, integrate this here, do all this, and then the complexity goes up. You're a school district. Your core mission is to educate the kids in a safe and secure environment, right? That's what the primary focus for all of you is. Why should the school district, this is the superintendents, this is what they commonly say, why should we be buying all these things, right? Why should we become a security expert, especially when you haven't been affected yet? Anyone have a good story on here on how you influenced leadership before the attack occurred, a big one that impacted you, that got them to even think about this type of concept? Yeah, that's the challenge, right?
We have something that's going on right now. This last year, we're trying to bring security at the mindsets of the superintendents, of the business managers. And so at the ESD level, we took several superintendents and several business managers. It wasn't just the IT directors, because we've been preaching to the IT directors all the time about security and the importance of that. We then invited in our local FBI agent, who scared the living daylights out of them, and to help start that conversation. So now you've got the superintendent or a business manager, not all of them around the county, but several of them that are also influential with their counterparts in other districts, starting to talk about it and going, we need, when you get scared by the FBI, some of the stories that they've told, it really helps influence that conversation from their level, which then they control the dollars and where things get spent down into IT and other aspects of teaching and training people and in digital citizenship and other things like that.
It's a great point. How many of you in here have heard of Infragard? Okay, look up Infragard. Infragard is an organization that's about protecting government and education assets as a whole. It's usually led in each state by, there's an FBI leadership component, and then there's a private public sector component, and it's technology professionals, cities, states, higher ed. There's usually very few K-12 folks involved in that environment. Go check it out. It's a great resource. If you want to become a member, they do background checks. So this is a component. They want to know that people that are participating aren't using the information they have in a bad way. But I highly recommend this. This is a great place to start building relationships with people that are very serious about trying to move the needle on security in the U.S. and you're going to get a lot of great thought leadership from it, and use this to help influence your leaders and maybe even get them involved, right? The more that you guys talk about these problems and get involved in these communities of interest, the more you're going to be able to help solve the problem yourselves, right? Because at the end of the day, this is about you, right? We can't do it for you. Even if you buy our technologies, if you don't implement them correctly and get the leadership involved to do it, you're still going to have issues.
So, Jeremy, I think the theme here today is bringing the different groups of people together, right? So what you did. So how effective was that afterwards when the FBI came in?
I think it got the conversation started. They then went to their IT directors because we didn't invite all the IT directors.
Right.
We only invited a few people here and there. There was only a couple IT directors, a couple superintendents, a couple. It started the conversation going. I think what needs to happen is we need to have that on a more regular basis. That way, it's not, you hear it once, you get scared about it, and then a few weeks later, you're kind of numb to it again, and you got to bring those things up. But it comes top of mind when several of your districts have bonds out. And if you pass a big bond in your district, you become a huge target from those people in Nigeria and other places that are trying to social engineer their way into having you pay large POs to things that you never bought from. So yeah, it's hoping that it's not the short-term game, it's the long-term game. And so keeping that going.
So what are you trying to protect? Do any of you have a way to measure what's important and where you should be applying resources and equating that risk to that? Is there? And this is something that would be a tie-in with the business office, where they're looking at, if this goes down, this is the risk that's associated to a financial side, to a brand side. If any of you got a measuring stick for that in your districts? Okay, so this is a great thought. Okay. So we know that these are things that are top of mind for you, right? But then we get into this area, it gets a little gray, depending on what capabilities you have in your districts. We have some districts that have to deal with PCI compliance, some districts, depending on what capabilities they have in their environment. And also on the credit card side, I don't know how many of you have credit card systems running on your networks. There's specific governance and legal compliance that are associated to that. But these are the things that, from a law standpoint, that are no-brainers where energy needs to be applied. And there may be some that I'm missing here. Is there any that I'm missing from a Washington, Oregon perspective where you have law issues because this is at a federal level, most of these. What about at an Oregon, Washington level? Is there specific legislation that you guys have to follow on a cyber side? Okay. Well, just wait, it's coming, right? Depending upon the state and the level of maturity and the effect that's happening in the environment, we're starting to see law get brought into the environments. This trying to drive better behavior with the non-technical folks to make investments.
I got to go back to the guy in the corner to ask the questions.
Sure.
And this topic right here, who is enforcing that to the school districts?
This is tough, right? There's a maturity level. At the school district level, no one is. Not yet. We're not at that maturity level, right? I mean, you can call your local law enforcement, depending on where you live, and tell them that you've been hacked, and they're going to be like, okay, well, sorry, and hang up the phone, right? And then you can go into other environments in the country where they actually have cyber attack forces that deal with these types of events, right? So it really depends on where you are, what exposure, how much pain's been inflicted by this. But once again, we're in the infancy of all this. As we get into this more connected world, the more you're going to see eventually more legislation that gets associated to this. I'm involved in something called the National Cybersecurity Center. And one of the tenets of the National Cybersecurity Center is to educate government officials and legislators on cyber, because they know they're the ones that are responsible for creating laws and trying to do what you're talking about, right? But they don't have a mechanism to be aware, right? So this is an issue where I think as you, if you have any relationships with any of the policymakers in your region or in your county or your city, your state, have conversations with them about what's happening in your environment. I know we tend not to think about this, but they're the ones that can help you drive that. So go have the conversation. That's what they're there for. Help drive. Cybersecurity is top of mind for, I'd say, almost everyone that we speak to. They just don't know how to deal with it. especially at the legislative level. And the ones that are driving it are on the very large organizational side, like the state and on the government side, on the higher ed side, the ones where they're being affected and they have the ability to do it, but they don't hear about your pain unless you don't go talk to them. So how many of you have recently gone through an airport and gone through security? Okay, so this is a very common thing for us. So I'm going to use an analogy. They use all these different capabilities to try and find the bad guy in the stack, right? And as something bad occurs, they try to add more capabilities to try and detect the bad guy. And we'll walk you through this. So you have curbside officers that are at the airport, maybe even at the entryway of the airport, that are trying to detect suspicious behavior, actual human element. Then they may have cameras there to try and see all the entry and exit points of what's going on in the environment. Now, how many of you have started to make investments on video surveillance in your schools based on incidents, right? So I don't know if that was done pre a lot of the bad stuff that's happened or in result to some of the bad stuff that's occurred. But and then my next question would be, for those of you that raised your hand, how many of you are using it reactively or using it proactively? Reactively, right? It's not used as a proactive tool. You may not be using analytics to actually alert. Maybe using analytics, right?
We have SROs who actually have the cameras
right.
at school, so it's more of a if they happen to see.
So hopefully they're looking at it.
It's not analytics.
Right. Okay. So there's a human element, maybe not a technology element, that's helping make them aware, right? Let's go into a large airport environment. You can have thousands of cameras. You can't have a person watching every one of them, right? You need tools to look at the data and try and make it real. So then we have the curbside video that we were talking about to hopefully monitor what the human element cannot see, right? Which is your environment, right? If you don't have the tools and you can't see it, then you don't know until after something has occurred. So then we have more officers inside the airports that hopefully are there to detect and see what's happening as people are coming into the environment. And then we have videos that hopefully capture what they miss. And then we have that element of the traditional side where maybe you're not using analytics and you're using it to see after an event has occurred to try and capture the incident. And how many of you have made investments in video surveillance, but the video surveillance, when you went to go look at the event, the quality of the video wasn't good enough to see who it was, right? And let's talk about why that may have happened. They bought the camera solution based on how much it cost versus what its capabilities were, right? Or they didn't mount the cameras correctly or in the right place to be able to get the best point of view on what the situation was. Or time of day as the sun goes by, what effect it has on that. Those variables weren't taken into consideration, right? Technology fits into the same place. The technology may have the capability, but if the thought wasn't put into how to actually implement it, you have issues. So then we go into the enhanced face recognition. As you mentioned, I don't think anyone's using this yet, but this in the big camera environments, this is foundational, because it's no good to have cameras that are being just reactive. We want the cameras to be able to tell us when something bad is happening. And now this is starting to happen on networks, right? And what I mean by that, by starting, is this whole concept of artificial intelligence and data mining and how logic is being applied into technology components. These are things that when you go from the past into the future, these are capabilities as a perspective that you should be looking at. Does it have the ability to take this traditional approach where I'm being reactive and allow me to be proactive? Because if you can't be sitting there monitoring it all the time, then it's not delivering any value for you. So then we have the ticketing and document verification. So you go and maybe you check in on your phone, or you go to the ticket counter, you get your ticket, they try to verify, hey, give me your ID, you're the person who's trying to get the ticket. And then we go to the security checkpoint by the TSA. And then they do the same verification again. But it's a government official, their role is just to do that and try to detect any suspicious behavior that may be there. And then we have the no-fly list. Maybe one day you had a bad day and had too many drinks and you got on the airplane and behaved in a way that you shouldn't have. Uh-oh, on the no-fly list, you're not going out. Or it could be one of those really bad incidents, the terrorist guys, that certainly shouldn't be on the plane. And then we have the final gate documentation. So there's this whole process, right? All of these steps that you have been through, maybe you didn't think about them in this holistic way, but the intent was trying to capture the bad guy, right? And as technology has evolved, the capabilities on being able to detect the bad guy have gotten better. But it's still not there, especially when we take this into account, the insider threat. How many of you have had people who just don't know any better? I've been a negligent insider as well, where you click on this and something bad occurs, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, I've gone to a news website and go to wake up my monitor on my machine, and I click, and it also clicked me into a link that took me into a phishing target, just like that, just by pure accident, right? Especially when you look at all the micro ads that are in websites today. I mean, it's designed for you to step into a bad situation, whether you're aware of it or not. And hopefully you have tools that prevent that low-hanging fruit, where if you do make a mistake, it could have stopped that, right? Then we have the compromised insiders, okay? We have the machine today, but how many of you are actively doing updates on all your infrastructure? Staying ahead. Okay, that's good, right? But a lot of you aren't. And for those of you that aren't, you're there. You're going to have pain at some point. What level that's going to be is going to vary depending on what capabilities you have inflicted. But this is the situation that you have when you don't do your software updates on your infrastructure and on the assets that your staff and teachers and students are using. This is the issue that you have. Unknowingly, they are compromised and you're unaware of it. Then we have, because they're going in and out of the environment, bringing those things to you. And then you got a lot of students that are very curious, right? Intentionally, like I mentioned before, trying to affect you. So when you apply all these capabilities to that, and then you're trying to use your normal TSA airport approach, but they look like a good guy, and you think they're a good guy, but one day, for whatever reason, they become the bad guy, whether they're aware of it or not, how do you deal with that? Right? This makes it incredibly difficult on the technology side because you can see people's behavior. But seeing how they apply what they do when they're not in your environment or when they go home or where they go to the coffee shop, how they use those resources and what they do when they bring them back, how does that work? This is the stuff that bothers me most when I think about security. This is back to that question about, are we secure? As long as there's a human element there, it's almost impossible to ever say that this will be the case. And then we think about, this is a legacy component, right? You have the district data that for some of you may still just be inside the district assets, but if you're consuming a lot of cloud, the data's everywhere now. And you have all these guys trying to get to it with whatever mechanism that they have from a threat perspective. So, and then as the data's moving to cloud, whether you're aware of it or not, how do you deal with that? How many of you are struggling with cloud consumption? And how many of you have a mechanism with your leadership to know when they've made a decision to buy a cloud-based technology and how that data gets used in that environment? Right? This is a tough one. This is one where when I'm talking with administrators, I spend a lot of my energy because they make a lot of decisions based on what a capability is and how it affects what their specific role is without thinking the bigger picture of what risk it brings into the district.
Well, I think that's rampant, right?
It's rampant.
I mean, the teachers buy whatever they want to buy, the graders just the classroom, and you got facilities probably interested in irrigation to the network, Southtown IT, it happens. It's massive, right? So I think the theme of being able to bring it back together, I think, if you learn anything today,
Yeah.
bring it to solid together.
So, how do we deal with it? And the first thing is try to bring the complexity level down and look at it in more of a, we try to simplify it, and this is probably oversimplifying it depending on the environment, but look at it in an administrative standpoint. And what I mean by that is governance, policy, looking at the risk component, figuring out which things are really important, which things aren't, looking at the technical side, which most of you are there to manage, and then the physical side. There's also a physical element to this. And tying those things together so that when you're looking at risk, physical and not physical, administrative and also the technology, bringing those together so that you have some tools as your investment and your capabilities grow, you can start managing these things holistically and break it down into bite-sized pieces so that you can consume them as you're able to make the investment. Really the hardest piece, in my opinion, is in this side, right? You can create policies all day, but getting people to abide by them and being able to enforce them is a huge issue, right? I mean, you probably make a lot of investment in technology to stop it, but how many times is the teacher or the principal or the superintendent telling you to, oh, we locked down Twitter or whatever it is, but no, you need to open it up because this is affecting how we do what we do. And we have some environments that I work with where IT has basically said, okay, we have the learning environment, which we naturally know is completely insecure and always going to be that way. That's a known variable. We're going to treat it like higher ed does with their environment. And then we have the rest of our assets, where we need to segment the things that we really, really care about, and teachers and students should never have access to them, and let's break those out and manage them differently. But a lot of schools that we talk to, everything's in the same environment. Segmentation, the thought of segmentation from a risk perspective hasn't even been implemented. How many of you have implemented a segmentation policy based on risk? That's good. That's good. Pain has probably inflicted that decision, right? That's a low-hanging fruit. That's low-hanging fruit. Those are things that you can easily do without having to make a significant technology investment. It's going to take time to carve out those things, understand where things are, but that's one where it's an easy one to do if you look at what those assets are and start moving them over and separating them.
I'm just curious, in your districts, where are you seeing the priority in terms of investment of those three buckets? Is it even, or is it?
Is physical, technical, or administrative more important in your district? Is that really your question, Rob?
Yeah.
I see huge investment happening in the physical side. Is physical investment equate to technical investment?
No, it's different things. You can have all the technical controls on your servers that you want, but if the door to the server room is like made out of plywood or cardboard, it doesn't matter. You know, they're going to have access to everything.
Or if you take technology and put it in the physical environment that bypasses all those physical controls, right? It doesn't matter how good the lock is. Sure.
That Seattle Housing Authority guy was on the same topic. He was saying that most of their security was the data in their on their own network, legacy type stuff. You know, a lot of social security numbers with what they do. And one of the comments he made was moving stuff to Office 365 was a no-brainer because the security's there. So it's a cloud situation that has security built in. When you save the file, you're able to say who's able to use it, et cetera. And that's generally easy fix for things that you can get into that environment. So we'd be better off if our teachers save the systems they want on a group that could be transferred to another user in the future, rather than on their their folder on our server would be a less secure choice, or their other cloud-based solutions. So really about a simple way to attack a bulk of the security issues is to go to Office 365, train people how to save their files into group OneDrives rather than individual OneDrives, because you lose that individual worker, you lose their OneDrive. But if they make a group, they can pass the ownership of the group on to the next person that takes over that job.
And that's a great question, right? Is cloud a better place for your data to be? It depends.
With the security built into Office 365.
No, you're transferring the risk. You're transferring it from being a thing on like your file server in the server room to it's on Microsoft's cloud or Google's cloud. It's a different kind of risk. It's a different profile.
Right.
And who's
so
responsible for it?
What he's saying and what I'm echoing is that the security that's built into the Microsoft OneDrive location is higher than the security he had at Seattle Housing Authority on his own servers.
No. It could be, but
you
also now you
can't
that data that's
you
moved.
don't have a clue with Microsoft security.
Yeah, the data that moved is now all under the risk of Microsoft. If someone comes up with a way to crack Office 365, every client that uses O365 is now at risk, whereas if you left it on your own box in your server room, it might not be.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
You don't know what Microsoft security is. You don't have a clue, and they won't tell you. Right. And it's just like he says, if Microsoft's compromised, you just gave away everything. And you have no control, and you probably won't learn until it's 6 months later if you go by industry.
So those are the questions that have to be asked, right? I mean, you have to be, are you really comfortable with whoever the XYZ company is that says, your data is going to be secure with us?
One question too, how much security do you see what I call, security theater? I'll use the example. Remember after 9/11, if you went to the airport, you saw National Guard with AR-15s. That was security theater because it didn't stop anything.
Right. It was more about perception than reality, right?
Exactly. How much of this stuff do you see is really, someone said SROs, security theater, because our SRO is only in the building 50% of the time, but we have one.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one, and it varies depending upon the environment. Where you've recently had an incident, the natural response is to do everything you can to make people feel safe, even though it's not safe. And there's a balance there, and I'm not a psychologist by any means, but apparently there's reasons that people make these decisions to try and bring comfort to a naturally uncomfortable world, which cyber is. What I would say is be hyper vigilant, regardless of what anyone says, and ask questions. Don't naturally assume that cloud's going to be secure. We've just talked about every reason why it wouldn't be, right? I mean, yes, do they have more capabilities and more investment than you do? Sure, but they're also a much bigger target than you are. So you have to equate that risk, right? So you have to figure out what assets are we comfortable moving in an environment. And then it's also a business conversation. Should IT be the one saying, hey, it's okay to move it to the cloud? Is business, finance, legal, insurance, do they say it's okay? Maybe they should be at the table helping you figure that out. And if they're not at the table, then that could be an issue if an incident arises. Go ahead.
Kind of echo what I was saying is you need to start with the administrative section first, because if you don't, then you may be underspending, overspending, or spending on the wrong things in those other two blocks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And usually, depending on how severe the incident is, the two people that are targeted inside districts are the superintendent and CIO or director of IT, depending on the size of the district. Those are the ones that are targeted in terms of, hey, they were the bad guys, let's get them out and everything's going to be better again. But that's where I think there has to be, back to my point about hypervigilance, CYA, do everything you can to educate everyone on this and try to motivate leadership to do what I'm getting ready to talk about now. What are the threats that are relevant to our district? You may not ever be able to fully answer that question, but you should start thinking about it, right? Which ones can cause us the most pain? Like there's a district that I work with in the Southwest that DDoS was killing them, right? To the point where they weren't able to do any of their assessments that were going on in their environment. And so they ended up making an investment. They spend roughly $2 million a year on DDoS protection, right? That's a big chunk of money to be spending on that. Most districts can't afford it, right? But for them, that was worth it because of the pain that they went through. They legally, in their state, had to do the assessments or they were going to be penalized. So they made the investment to do it. And they're still doing it, even though they don't want to. Go ahead.
I'm going to make a plug. Anybody that's on Washington State K20 network, they just implemented a DDoS at the K20 network edge. So anybody on K20 network has now got DDoS protection on your network.
So back to our point about what's important. What are the critical things in your environment? Network, people, process, tools, software, cloud, and who runs it? And when something breaks, who's going to be responsible for it? Is security a part of the plan? Is there even a plan? Do you have a formalized response, right? When something occurs, how do you deal with it? And then I heard there was a district in Washington, I'm not sure if they're in the room, they were at Coast talking about how they lost their whole data center environment based on fire suppression system went off. And, yeah. Okay. So for them, hearing how they dealt with that on the people on process side was really intriguing, right? But they didn't necessarily have a formalized response on how to deal with something like that. And do you have the capability associated needed? Right? They do now, right? Yeah. They learn from the pain, right? And then when something does happen, what do you say and how do you say it and who should be involved, right? Then, to your point, do you have relationships with all the law enforcement and government organizations to be able to deal with the event? FBI, county, city, whatever it may be. And then they can help you with a lot of these things. They have that maturity. Some of them don't. Some of them are like, sorry, man, hang up the phone. You're on your own. Or there's some school districts I've worked with that are near military bases. And those bring in some interesting dynamics, especially with where their children are in the military. There was one, the superintendent shared this with us. They had a student that took his dad's laptop, because he was out of the country, and took it into the school. And next thing you know, DOD comes and shuts down the school. And they didn't have access to the school for 3 days, just because the kid took that machine into their environment, right? So that forced them to say, hey, we need to have better relationships with this military base so that if something does occur, we can work through this, because the military doesn't care about whether a school is being served or not. They care about national security and their needs. Then, back to our point earlier, do you have an investment in people, process, and technology that's equal to your risk? And do you even have a way of measuring risk? This is a tough one. Every time I bring this up to CFOs or superintendents in school districts, they say, well, hey, our cyber policy is $1,000, then we're covered. Well, you haven't had enough incidents yet. That's going to change, right? And it will. I think this is going to change as more and more pain starts to be inflicted upon your environments. Go ahead.
One of the interesting things that I've found is some industry standard for cybersecurity. I was reading through it the other day, and it's quite intense. It's probably way overkill for most school districts. So at some point, until there's some process where there's some realistic benchmark or audit for school districts, and somebody at the state level or something is actually auditing a district, I don't think we'll ever get that level of, what's the risk is really whether they pass an audit or not.
I see audits. We do see audits in some states where there's more thought going into this, but it's not around the risk, financial risk brand component. It's more about this system has these certain set of controls, and if you don't have this met, then you can't use the service, right? It's not about the financial, insurance, or legal side. That level of maturity I have not seen. If you've seen it, let me know, but I have not seen that in any state where they're doing that level of assessment inside school districts.
That's where I'm expecting to see it really drive from first is our risk pool insurance that has cybersecurity on it. At some point, they're going to come up with that set of benchmarks and said, in order for us to insure you for cybersecurity, we need to audit you for this set of benchmarks.
So I was in a conversation at a trust. This is a trust that insures 97% of the schools in my state. And I had a conversation with the head of that trust, and I said, how much do you have in your fund? And they told me how much they had in their fund. And I said, well, you know that this community college, also in our state, so far they're at $37 million on the cost of the incident that occurred with them. I said, how much would that take out of your fund? And I said, quick math, 33% of your fund for insurance is going to be gone if you had this incident. And it's like the light turned on for them, right? That's the kind of thing that gets those folks' attention when you say, I can lose 25 or 30% of our total ability to insure, right? And that's where the conversation for you, if you can help influence the business officials to think about if this does occur, what that risk is actually associated with, can help start move the needle. And then the good thing is that there's a lot of organizations that made huge investment on trying to bring capabilities in an environment. And we know that you're never going to be able to do this because you don't have the investment, don't have the expertise. So don't reinvent the wheel. A lot of this is already out there. When we think about this, risk is the key component. How can we efficiently and effectively manage our cyber risk? We have to know what our risks are. So that's the first thing, is trying to measure that from a technical and from an administrative point of view. And then start leveraging these frameworks, look at them and figure out how you can consume them and start using them in your environment, right? There's been a massive amount of resource and capability put into this. And NIST, for example, has a K-12 forum. I don't know if any of you participate in that. They have a K-12 cyber forum for school districts around the country that participate in this. It's a great resource for you guys to go hear about how others are dealing with this challenge. And there's a myriad of maturity levels, to the ones that have no security implemented, to ones that have full-on CISOs, policies, boards bought in, administrators bought in. So you can learn from them, right? It's going to be much easier for you to learn from them, the people that have already gone down this road, than the manufacturer that's telling you this widget's going to solve the problem, right? And then once you get past this component, it's about, and this is where the administrator is absolutely foundational to this, is embed security into the culture of your school. Most importantly in the classroom, right? If the students start learning at the beginning of age on how to be more, have better cyber hygiene, right? Getting them to think about how to be more effective, getting the teachers to be more effective, and you being the purveyors of helping them have awareness. This is where we start making change, right? This is the common theme. Like if you go to NIST, this is the message that they're trying to drive: is there has to be vigilance here. We have to continue to educate. It's not something we do one time. We have to do it every day. And the only way we can do it every day is if it's a part of our culture, right? And building this is having the mindset that it's embedded everywhere throughout the district. It has to be a shared goal. It's not just IT's problem. It's everyone's job, and transparency is critical. The more you guys talk about this and share this pain, the more you'll be able to deal with it. Now, I know there's legal aspects to this, and you have to be careful there, but sharing this pain and figuring out how to deal with it and how you manage these problems is going to be the way to move the needle forward. And everything that I've talked about here is located at this link. I have a pretty good high fidelity. There's no malware in there, so make sure you have machines are on there. So you can go here and look at this, and then all the different things that we talked about are all from these different resources. From the Computer Security Resource Center to NIST to the NSA. These are all great places for you to get expertise and thought leadership for these environments. Question?
This is very scary. So I'm about to walk out and sign a check or something to get this going right now. But the reality is that our teachers who are at home always comes to the classroom and say, why can't we have this since I'm working in my house, but how do I make it happen here? And there is something that I always...
Everyone's an IT leader at their home, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And with all the security that they need.
Right.
So one of the things that we always talk about is if we had a lever, and it says here's functionality and here's security, where did you put that in there? Where is the functionality? It's too functional, we lose security. If it's too secure, we lose functionality. And that's the kind of a tough sell for the administrators at one point.
They always want capability. They want the better experience over security. If security is ever going to affect the experience, it's going to turn them off, right? And I see time after time, they would rather be willing to take the financial risk versus affect the classroom's ability to do what they do. Matter of fact, I think I've never met a superintendent that has said that they would be willing to do that, one over the other. There might be some out there, but I haven't met them yet.
So the other side of that is where we're pushing from the instructional side, I think goes to your presentation, is what we call digital citizenship.
Yes.
And some teachers, since we're going to one-to-one, they're saying we would like to have the ability to monitor the classroom and all the computers and block this and block that so they don't go to these websites. And some of the staff in the instructional side are saying there needs to be an education to the teacher that it's a classroom management.
Yes.
We need to teach the students not to go there and self-manage themselves too. And we go, how long is that going to take? 5 years? 10 years? In the meantime, the risk is there.
This is still not top of mind on the curriculum side. I've been involved in SD for 10 years, and I still don't see them saying that this is top of mind for educators, right? Of course they're aware of it and it's causing issues, but as far as them building this into the culture of what they do, they don't have enough time to do what they do already, much less add this on top, right? So this is the only thing that we can continue to do, to your point, is be passionate, connect with them on a relationship level, try to make them aware, and hopefully it isn't pain that drives them to change, which typically that is the thing that does it, right? But awareness is the first step. Try to make them aware without being the cry wolf scenario, because that's not going to get you very far. There's a balance. Find that balance and try and make them more aware to make the change and make the investment. Because most superintendents see security as insurance. And I know one thing, I don't like paying a lot for insurance, right? And unfortunately, it's a necessary component. And that's how most business leaders look at cybersecurity and any technology that's involved in it. Is that it's like paying a very high insurance premium to protect the maybe, right? Any other questions?
So one of the things that we're contemplating rolling out, and it's because users are the ones who take the hit, right? Because of the problems.
Right.
is rolling out a phishing email data collecting thing, so that we can start recording the data, and then at least when we start having the conversation about this, bring that, have something on our side, you know, to show how many users are actually not doing the right thing. It's a preemptive kind of thought process before you have a big discussion on, and you can't answer the questions that you don't know. So if you have the data behind you when you bring it up, then it's something.
One of the things the Seattle Housing Authority guy said, within that 16,000 employees, they had training on how to do the right thing with emails coming in, et cetera. And it was a 2-hour training they would go to, and then every now and then they'd send out a test. You'd see how many people clicked on it, and the people that clicked on it had to go back and take the training again. So.
Yeah, that's becoming a common practice out in enterprise.
Yeah, we're looking at the same thing. When I said bringing that in, the digital citizenship isn't. We always talk about going to students. We need to be teaching that to our business managers and the accountants and the district office and the administrators, because those are the ones. Are, you know, we don't have enough money to go buy all the electronics and all the devices out there, but we can change the conversation and try to help educate what we should or shouldn't be doing. We've been having a lot of social engineering going on in our districts and in our ESD alone of, hey, send me that, you know, I'm in a meeting right now, just pay that bill. The email's coming in, right? It's getting through all the expensive stuff we've got, you know, and, you know, hoping that the person on the other end will just pay that PO or make that payment or send that database of, you know, the employee numbers or whatever out. And so having that conversation to where every year I'm sure everyone has to go through the whole probably at the beginning of the year where you take the little online test about the workplace environment and how to work with students and things you should and shouldn't do type things, and adding that into one of the components that we do. Should you be clicking on this email? What should you do? And then I've heard of stories where people will actually give out gift cards to people that passed the positive reinforcement in some of those tests, but in reiterating the where we click is.
I've got another comment or question. Has anyone had done a security audit in your building or your school district? Okay, we had one a few years back, and the comment from the company that did that said, you didn't know about all these holes that you have, therefore you were not quite as liable. Now that it's documented, now you have you are now liable for anything that goes if it doesn't get, you don't get any remedy with it.
Yes, liability is less for the ignorant. Is that the logic? Yes. Yes.
It is. That it was a comment.
If you are doing your test to see who responded, make sure you've got it in writing from your superiors that they know you're doing it, or it could be a career event.
Oh yeah, that should come from the superintendent down.
Make sure it's cleared and in writing if you don't want to lose your job.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Yes. Yes.
Oh, you want to shake your recorder off there?